And that's what public environment is all about. Creating processes where people get so close to the things that you're creating with the contractors, with the clients, that they will live and breathe this gift of public environment. The library in Alexandria, we were fighting for 12 years to get it up. Fighting is maybe not wrong, but working hard to make it happen. And within this sense, the most important thing is that during the Spring Revolution in Egypt, the people of Alexandria came together because they had been given a place which they could move into, which was theirs, which was open, accessible, a library. They protected the building 24 hours a day from hooliganism and from other people who wanted to ruin it. So the discussion of who it belongs to was no longer there. It was not belonging to the director of the library. It was belonging, or to the government. It was belonging to the people of Alexandria, and they protected it. So that was the institution that kept open during the whole Arabic Spring in Egypt. But similarly, we've been trying to do that with the Opera House. Quite obviously, you can move onto the roof, and the roof all of a sudden becomes this threshold-free zone, but it's also not commercialized. You can't, we call it a cappuccino-free zone. You can't buy anything, but you can sit and listen to a concert, or you can be alone by the water. So the house, the actual house, provides both these opportunities, being alone together in a performance, but also being alone with yourself or your family. But it can be used in many ways. And there are really no limits. You don't describe, when you provide something like this to the city of Oslo, you don't describe its use. The fact is that the urban planners don't have a tool for showing it on the urban plan. Is it a plaza or is it a building? We don't have these tools. But the Nolly plans would be a good interesting, and I've mentioned this in the other places. The Nolly plans from 1650s by Nolly in Rome shows the public and the private spaces only, independent of if they're indoor or outdoor. So this space would, for instance, in a Nolly plan be white because it's public, even if it's a building. So you have the black for the private and the white for the public. And all of a sudden you read your city differently. It's not about the objects, it's not about the buildings, but it's about the way they connect. And that, of course, was said, you really cannot control what is happening. He's French, of course. And that accounts for things that are not legal as well. You don't describe exactly the use of anything you produce, because that's the unpredictability of the future. You provide possibilities, and architecture is the stage for these possibilities. Like Times Square in New York, which we're just redoing from a very urban car hub to a pedestrian area. Not to say that this is, this is how kind of the New Yorkers see it with the mosques. But that's not how we deal with it, and the bisons. But if you look at the whole area with the Broadway going through on a diagonal, there was a huge traffic chaos on the whole of Times Square. The New Yorkers had left the city completely, or this place completely. They never came back and visited. There's only tourists, pickpockets, and cars. So what happens when you remove cars from a place like that? You get a new perspective of things. You're locating your body again in a new position in the city, which you couldn't do before. And by doing that, you start using, again, things in a different way. A businessman standing on the bench instead of sitting. Or, of course, women doing yoga. That is everywhere. But Times Square couldn't do this before. Crime rates went down, of course. The NOx pollution went down. The way that people were using the shops went up. New Yorkers came back. And one could always say, okay, so what about the cars that usually were driving through Times Square? Well, that's none of our business, really. So in the end, these kind of things do happen when you open up Ladies from Brazil, The Naked Cowboy, kind of things that are unpleasant to many. So that's when architecture becomes martial art. You try to take the forces coming against you, turn them back onto the chief of police. So he doesn't know what hit him, but he knows that it was his own punch, that we just turned the forces off. So we've been fighting that, and we want this to be happening. We want the girls to be able to celebrate their birthday on Times Square. So the chief of police will not dig up Times Square again to give it back to the cars. Similarly, we had discussions on the Monday after the Charlie Hebdo attack in Paris with Pierre Bachet, who's the former boyfriend of Yves Saint Laurent. And he's part owner of the Le Monde Group, a big newspaper. We had that meeting Monday after Charlie Hebdo, which changed Europe completely. And he said, I want an open media house. A media house that the public can connect to. I don't want a castle for our media house. So of course you use the arch, and you use the way that the world eats away in Le Monde from whatever is publicly accessible. You don't close the floor or the street level. So the arch is a representation in Paris for openness and connection. One riverside to the other passes a way you move through. So we decided to use these spheres as something that created space that is accessible to the public. And as you come through the entrance, that means, I know the quality of this drawing is really miserable, but this is the way it connects. Because it connects through the sphere, and the sphere all of a sudden becomes the cover between the indoor and the outdoor. Entrance space, very industrial, very down to earth. It's almost like what we have called barefoot architecture. It's reduced, it's reductionist. It's not minimalist. Minimalism is something totally different. Minimalism is design. Reductionism is removing design. So the plans, and this way of the building hoovering in the middle into the office spaces, showing the building in the double glazed layer with the pixelation that actually is a reproduction of the former printing processes within Le Monde. But it could also be a metro station in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, where all of a sudden the connection between outside and up and down is like a periscope. So you can see from up what is going on down, but you can also see from down what is going on up. And this is breaking through the barriers of a fairly strange, disconnective society in many ways. So once this is under construction for the moment, and it actually gives you this connection between up and down, and between old and new. We're trying to do the same in Adelaide, but kind of different environment, because there in Australia, they connect everything with sports. Which is nice, because then you all of a sudden have the exams, graduation events, and sport. But we're trying to make it available to the students and to the city, just simply again by layering the building in a way that we can use the city twice on top of each other. So it doesn't get read as an object only, but it's something in between a landscape and a building. And then, of course, sports. So what about social environment? Social environment, again, back to the Library of Alexandria, which we won in 1989. What we did there, we chose companies in Egypt and put them together with companies outside of Egypt to have transfer of learning. We introduced a completely new bidding system for the contractors to come in, where they had to supply everything from water XL1, which is a drink that you drink, salt, toilets, shoes, helmets. Setting out to say, we don't want anyone to die on our building site. A library in Alexandria is not worthwhile dying for. But the city itself took that quite far, to the extent that we could train young stonemasons. It's a social responsibility to train people in a process like that. And again, with the artists and with the support from the Norwegian government, we were able to train 20 young stonemasons. Because the industry in Egypt had all of a sudden reduced its capacity in stonework down to cutting stone slabs of 1.5 to 2 centimeter thickness. That was all the industry could do. And these people had built the pyramids. So we say, we train them and we create a new understanding of how sort of the craft of stone masonry could look like. 6,500 square meters of hand-carved signs and symbols on the outer wall. Splitting the stone, taking it out of the quarry, all of a sudden became an issue. And a lot of these industries that we created throughout the process, 12-year-long process in Alexandria, are still remaining as quite healthy small businesses. In Saudi Arabia, we were asked to design a cultural center. We had been reading, as many of you I'm sure also have, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino, the writer. In the discussion between Kublai Khan and Marco Polo, and I can't remember the name of the city, they are discussing the cultural aspect in relationship to the Roman arch. They're saying that the keystone of the Roman arch is our culture. If you remove the keystone, our society will collapse. So culture is the keystone, and as long as you maintain the pressure from one stone to the other, everything is intact. But if you remove the keystone, it will collapse. Our economy is maybe the basement and the foundations. If you shuttle those around, but still maintain the actual pressure between the stones, then you're fine. So we took the pebbles and created a building which consists of a constellation of pebbles found there with a keystone. But the smallest piece of the design is the keystone. If you remove that keystone in this type of structure, the building will fall down. So the library, the tower, the Great Hall, the auditorium are all cultural functions in Saudi Arabia. For a young population, 21 years in average, all on the internet, they know what they want. And by doing that, you create a complex situation of buildings and pebbles. So how to do this technically, I'm moving you all the way into sort of responsibility of production lines. We said these complex forms can best be defined by a line. And that line follows the shape of that pebble. And it starts off by one particular important opening and then wraps in as one line through the whole project. 360 kilometers of stainless steel pipes, 9.6 centimeters in diameter. And we had to build we built a tube bending machine, which is digital, so you have the full control of every pipe 6 meters long. And Peter French, he's also a New Zealander, was responsible for the facade. And it took us a long time to actually get every pipe produced. So in the end, you have a building, which I said is clad with these pipes, and every pebble looks slightly different, but more like a fingerprint. All of the elements belong to the same hand, but they are, in a way, located towards this one unified expression. So from the distance with the sky, the sort of layers of connections that you're getting because of the geometry. And then, of course, the top here, which I like, this kind of Star Wars thing. With the crane, you know, sort of the top moving away, the crane coming out, lifting people. So the windows are done by squashing the pipes flat. And that also gives a brise-soleil, which, okay, allows for the view, but protects against the sun. So these type of things we've been exploring, and it took us almost 2.5 years just to get and understand the geometry, everything related to the building. And then as you come closer towards the entrance and inside, you will see there is another material of importance, and that is rammed earth. And rammed earth is coming straight from the side. So on one hand you have the stainless steel, on the other hand you have the rammed earth, and all of a sudden you have a time difference of many thousand years meeting in one building. And the rammed earth, we had an Austrian, Martin Rauch, to come down and produce directly from the site the rammed earth elements that then in the end met and meets the stainless steel. I need not say that Saudi Aramco, who is the client of this building, giving it to the people of Saudi Arabia, is also an oil producer. So that demands a certain way of responsibility. With the pipes, we're now studying with the university in Saudi Arabia in Dhahran to see how we can pull the heat out of these pipes. We have about 80 degrees centigrade. We're filling them with liquid and see how we can heat exchange the energy being produced. So this is the belly of the library, and then you move up the library, which is one of the important buildings, one of the important pebbles here. And you come up and you see the fish skin-like surface, which is mounted only with one point in the middle, which means you can turn every element into place, and it's painted with mother-of-pearl surface, so you can see how it ends. And the wish is that, you know, young Saudis will kiss behind these bookshelves, because both men and women are coming through the same door. They're located in the same exhibition halls, in the same museum, and the same chairs in the concert house. And this is a little place where you hand back the books to the library. Don't forget to hand back books to the libraries. Now I've reminded you, it's very important. The library needs all the books out there back. It's the first public cinema in Saudi Arabia. And that means something. It's really the first large-scale museum and exhibition hall. And now we're working on the first expressionist exhibition that will be held there next year. So in the end, it's all about getting the women behind the wheel. Ground Zero Memorial Pavilion is another issue. We were given the task to design this tiny little building with the red roof. And all around us is this fantastically huge, great architect looking down at this little tiny building. So you can see the little building down there, and you can see the others around. It's wonderful to be looked at. But it was important for us to take the building that we're doing there and turn it into a reflection of today. So you could think of the pools as the past, our building as the present, and the high-rise buildings as a possible future. So it's all about trying to reflect the surface and the interiors in a connection between today and the immediate surroundings. So lately we have been trying to program these things. This is the Ryerson University Learning Center. It's connected to the library. Trying to look at urban situations of reprogramming. In this particular case, no program whatsoever. It's a student learning center without the program. It's self-programmed by the students. So it also puts a connection back to the Play Tower in Austria, which I was showing, where you bring outdoor functions inside. Look it up on Google Street View, because it goes into the building. It's the only building in the world where Google Street View actually goes inside. And that only shows that the way we open up for the students to spend their time in this building is of importance. It's like an outdoor plaza inside. My favorite spot is the beach. And some students have started coming in their swimming suits already. No water, however. But it could also be social responsibility towards post-traumatic situations. This is the Maggie's Cancer Center, which is about post-treatment of cancer. Fantastic organization. It could be in the control of bottom-up and top-down processes, like the benches here in Guatemala City, where the women, the sidewalks where the women are selling their tomatoes. We created benches that block the cars from parking on the sidewalks so the women can still sell their tomatoes. Simple strategies very often work in a solid manner. But it could also be other social tools, like here, the new Norwegian money, which we've designed, which is our next generation of money. And I said today I really like wind, because the whole design is based on the length of every pixel is related to the strength of wind. So if you have the 50 kroner, it's a short pixel picture, it's fairly low. If you increase to 100, the wind is slightly stronger. Up to 200, more wind on the before scale. 500, getting fairly strong. But up to 1,000, you have a full storm. So at least you remember how much you paid. So these are the type of things you can be inspired by also in social tooling, where money is part of that. So finally, the sustainable environment. What are we doing today? CO2 is the issue. It is the only issue, really. If we cannot reduce our CO2 footprint based on these simple facts, 40% of global energy is being used by the construction industry. 25% of global water is being used by the construction industry. 40% of global resources being used. This computer takes about 1.5 tons of raw material to be produced. And the building industry generates approximately 30% of all greenhouse gases. Huge responsibility. So what we've done, we've created a group consisting of a contractor, a client, engineer, architect, Zero, which is an environmental institution in Norway, and SEB, which is Zero Emission Buildings Studies at the University of Trondheim, and created what we call the Powerhouse. Powerhouse is, per definition, a constellation of companies that are aiming to have CO2 negative buildings in the future. But CO2 negative means all operations, everything the building is using through the lifetime, plus all embodied energies, which means the energy that goes into producing the screw, or the concrete, or the paper. Everything that is dealing with the production line, the transport. If you're very, very precise, you could lead it back to the clothing that the workers are wearing, or the food the workers are eating. So you have to get a full picture of the total CO2 equivalent. We've done one project, which has been a refurbishment of a very old office block outside of Oslo, where we couldn't change the aesthetics, but it was demanded by the city. They stay the same as from the 60s. So we focused on the envelope, tried to keep the black by burning the wood again, which is an old Japanese method, as you might know. We looked at displacement ventilation, both inside the cores and how it moves slowly through the space, and found that the main stair de facto can be the ventilation shaft. So that means you have huge volume of air actually being pushed through and slowly back out. So the exchange of air. Acoustics is not necessarily something that is dealing with CO2, but it's part of the environment. And to have good acoustics, we were using and reusing plastic bottles. So all the white that you see here is plastic from plastic bottles. The windows that we took out of the building, we located back into separating some of the office spaces. And then, of course, the geothermal elements producing energy, the photovoltaic production of energy. And at the end of that, you only have an energy balance of 14.3 kilowatt hours per square meter per year. That means it takes us 50 years to get CO negative, even with all this effort. When you start calculating with the computers inside, it takes another 50 years. It takes 100 years with all this effort. And here you can even subtract the concrete structure of the existing building from the embodied energy calculation, because it's already there. So what did we do when we did the SEB, Zero Emission Buildings test house? We were testing more systems at the same time, so they will exchange in an intelligent manner between themselves as to optimize both the production line and the use of energy. Interestingly enough, you will see that the photovoltaic system, and this diagram actually shows the CO2 equivalent of the production of the different elements of the building, calculated into CO2. So you will see that the photovoltaic systems, photovoltaic panels, have the absolute highest embodied energy than any other element. But these are the ones also producing the electricity. So you have to make sure that if you use photovoltaic cells, use them the right way. Don't put them where they don't work. And of course, everybody knows that every place on Earth has the same amount of sunlight or daylight throughout the year, just unevenly distributed throughout the year, knows that the further north and the further south you get, the better it is to have photovoltaic still production. Simply because overheating is one of the biggest problems of the photovoltaic cells. So you can use it. You will see concrete, extraordinarily high embodied energy in concrete. Use it as little as possible. So in this house, we were reusing materials, building up, testing out the systems, using bricks. What are you doing with all the bricks in Christchurch? Are you reusing these bricks, or reusing containers as swimming pools, or using sort of firewood as insulation material? So that gave us, over this 202 square meters, minus 0.6 kilograms equivalent CO2 per square meter per year. This is the first time that we've ever reached to be CO2 negative first year. And you have to go all the way. You have to go really deep into the testing of every element to make sure that that happens. So it is possible. Now we're trying to do that on a larger office building in Trondheim, all the way north in Norway, where all the studies, of course, start with the same thing: optimization, how much energy can you produce, what kind of materials would it exist from. So what we're hoping for the future, really, is that there will be no difference in how you define form and aesthetics, because form will have to follow our future environment. And that's, to me, maybe today, one of the most important things for the future. So thank you very much.